Love the love within. Love the love in your marriage. Love the love in your family. When you love love, you love God. Because God is love. My friends, it doesn't get any simpler than that. In fact, recently I was given a mission in Southern California. And a young man came to me, he was from India. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Father, you really believe that God is love?" And I said, "Young man, if God isn't love, this whole world is absurd. It's the only thing that makes sense out of life. If God isn't love, this world doesn't make any sense." And where I experience that love the most is within. I know today that my heart is filled with love. That's especially true since I've done a lot of anger work. And that love has always been inside of me. I've always wanted to be good. God's love has always been there to help me out of my messes. It's that love inside of me that pushes me to go beyond my selfishness, to be kind and thoughtful, to be forgiving, to be compassionate. It comes right from God. It comes right from God. And you know why my faith has become more and more important the older I've gotten? I've learned one of the hardest lessons of life. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. If you want God to laugh, just tell him your plans. See, I believe the greatest illusion in the world is that we're in control. In fact, you know, I told you the other night about having the torn Achilles heel. Well, I remember I had the surgery a week after September 11th, the following Tuesday. And you know, if I were a typical Jesuit in a high school or a parish, they'd send somebody to take my job while I recovered. Because it's a really tough surgery. And I could put, in fact, when they did the surgery, my whole tendon had disintegrated. And they had to use another tendon from part of the leg. And I couldn't put any pressure on my foot for a whole 2.5 months. It's awful hard to get about when you can't put any pressure on your foot. Well, normally speaking, they send a Jesuit to take my place. And I go to some nice quiet place and recover. Well, you know, I can't do that. I have people that are dependent upon my income. I'm like a normal person. I had to go back to work. So I went back to work a week after the surgery. And you know how they told you then to the airport, make sure you get there 2.5 hours early? Well, I was really nervous because I was on crutches and they were going to put me in a wheelchair. I got there 3.5 hours early. What they never told me, though, was because I was in a wheelchair, they took me right through the line. So I got there. They took me in a wheelchair, and then they deposited me in a chair, and they told me they'd come back to pick me up. Well, I'm there 3.5 hours before the flight. I have my crutches, the first time I've ever used crutches. We're klutzes in our family. I have my briefcase, and I have to go to the bathroom. And it's about 3 miles down the corridor. So I was so nervous about that I practiced good old discipline. Well, then you know what happened? They forgot to pick me up. People were getting on the plane, and there was nobody there to pick me up. So I'm there yelling and screaming, you know. And finally they see me, and they take me to the airport, to the plane. I'm the last person to get on the plane before they shut the door. The first week I go, they have 3 flights of stairs. I'm on the 3rd floor. Have you ever tried to go up the stairs when you couldn't put any pressure on your foot? I went up on my backside. And then, on the way down, first time down, the banister came off in my arms. So I went flying down the flight of stairs. The next week I went to a parish that had throw rugs. You know why they call them throw rugs? Because when you put your crutch on it, they throw you. I was thrown 3 times that week. The next week, I was up in Vancouver, BC. It rained. And when I was going between the church and the rectory, my crutches slipped on the wet cement, and I went flying and landed on my head. Oh, it was terrible. But you know something? It was a wonderful 5 weeks. You know why? 2 lessons. I've learned one of the hardest lessons that a man can ever learn, that I'm not in control. And I think anytime a man learns that, that's a very valuable lesson. And you know what happened to me? It's amazing. I was so dependent on people. They had to bring me my water. They emptied my bedpan. They brought me my dinner. I had a little bell. And I'd ring the bell, and the priest would come and serve me. See, the priests weren't used to serving people. That way, anyway. And you know something? I've been on the road for 19 years. I've known hundreds of priests. I got closer to those priests than any time during the 19 years. You know why? Because I was vulnerable. I was dependent on them. I let them love me, you know? In the old days, I'd do anything in the world for anybody, but I never let anybody do anything for me. And when I let people love me, I gave them a chance to love me, you know? It was a wonderful experience. Now, I would have never chosen it, believe me. And believe me, I never want to go through it again. But it was a wonderful experience. Life is what happens while we're making other plans. See, none of us, we don't know what we're going to be doing, where we're going to be a year from now. None of us do. I could be married to a woman with 15 kids. Ask anybody that knows me. I'm impulsive enough. I could so much fall in love that I don't even notice the 15 kids. The next thing I know, I'm married to a woman with 15 kids. Even if that were to happen, I know that God is with me. And God better be with me. Or I could be dead a year from now. You know, I recently went to a funeral of the guy who was our star quarterback in our champion senior year of football. He was the guy all the gals called. You know, the class hero? I'm finding myself going to more funerals than weddings. I'm knowing more people that are dying than are getting married. You know, this is about 2 months after I was at this guy's funeral. I was given a mission in South San Francisco. And I happened to mention about a classmate of mine dying. Well, there was a classmate of mine in the congregation. And he came running up to me and said, "Tom, who died?" And I said, "My very good friend." And my mind went blank, and I could not remember a person's name that I've known all my life. I call them senior moments. And you know what? The older I'm getting, the more frequent they happen. I mean, I forgot to put the quarters yesterday when I went to the lake here. And I went and I stopped at the store to get change, so I'd have the quarters. And then by the time I got to the lake, I'd forgotten why I had the quarters. That's what it means to get old, younger people. It'll happen. See, I don't know what's going to happen to me. None of us know what's going to happen to us. But the only thing that I absolutely believe in, no matter what happens to me, that God's love is always with me. That's the one thing I absolutely believe in. It's the only absolute I have in my life. Being a Catholic is not an absolute value. I don't have to be a Catholic to find God. Being a Jesuit isn't an absolute value. I don't have to be a Jesuit to find God. The only thing I absolutely believe in, no matter what happens to me, that God's love is always with me. That's my faith. That, for me, is the good news of Jesus Christ. But I don't want any of you to think that I live one happy day after another. Some days are better than others. But today, I have a choice. Now, for about the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to get into your life, and I want you now to be real honest with yourselves. This is a very important moment this week. How much of a controller are you? How much do you try to control the world around you? How much do you try to control your spouse? How much do you try to control your children? Notice I said try to. You know what makes a person control? Fear. And the more that fear runs a person's life, the more they're going to control. Now let me tell you what control is not. Control isn't giving information. It's not giving suggestions. It's not even giving a lecture. That's not control. You know what control is? Control is when I make you pay a price if you don't do what I want. That's control. And you know, that's taking it personally. It's conditional love. And I don't have to yell and scream at you to make you pay a price. There's a million ways we can make somebody feel guilty because they don't do what I want. But that isn't bad enough. You know what happens? I get angry at you when you don't appreciate how much I'm controlling you for your own good. Don't you know the only reason why I control you is because I love you? I'll be honest now. How many of you recognize that cycle of fear, control, anger? You know what? Everybody should have their hands up. You know why? Because we're all controllers. None of us are perfect. But the issue is whether we're a 10 or a 3. That's the issue. Now, I'll bet you this. I'll bet you that those of you that don't know you're a controller, I'll bet you you're the biggest controllers in this church tonight. You know what I've discovered in my ministry? The people that most need to hear something don't even know you're talking about them. That's what denial systems do. In fact, I gave a talk. I was in Connecticut, and I gave a talk to teenagers, and some of the parents, before I gave the talk, they came to me and they said, "Father, we're worried about some of these kids. We're just praying that you can get through to them." You know the kids that fooled around the most when I was talking? The kids that most needed to hear what I was saying. It's always that way. You know, last year I gave a mission up in the rural part of Oregon. In fact, I think the militia were out practicing in the hills. But after one of my conferences, a lady came up to me and she said, "Father, why aren't you preaching about hellfire and damnation?" I said, "Ma'am, I preach about God's love. And if you don't believe it, you're going to create your own hellfire and damnation. I don't need to preach about it." But you know, every once in a while, I run into these rigid, angry Catholics that every time they hear a priest preach about God's love, they want to report him to the bishop. They're so angry and rigid. The thing they most need to hear about is God's love. It might loosen them up a little bit, you know? You know what I'm saying? Isn't that true? In fact, I was up in Richland, Washington before Christmas, and I gave the same homily I gave Sunday. And after the homily, as I was greeting people after Mass coming out of church, a lady stopped me and she asked me if I believed in hell, which I thought was a rather strange response to my homily. And I'm going to talk about it later tonight. But I thought about it for a few days, and you know what? I came to realize that once we know God's love in our life, once we truly know in our hearts that we're loved by God, hell is not an option because we know we're loved. It's like when two people, when they really love each other in a marriage, and they know they truly love each other, they know that divorce is not an option because they're loved. And you know, if you really know God's love in your life, and you know God, you don't worry about hellfire and damnation because you know you're loved. You know why my childhood was so filled with hellfire and damnation? Because they didn't know God's love then. And all those people that are worried about hellfire and damnation, they should worry about it because they don't know God's love. You know? But anyway, get back to my main point. If you don't know you're a controller, ask your spouse, ask your kids if they think you're a controller. Make sure they don't have to pay a price. This actually happened to me. This wasn't too long ago. I got a call from a lady that she came with her daughter to this talk. And then on the way home, she asked her daughter, "Honey, do you think I'm a controller?" And her daughter said, "Mom, you're one of the best." You know what she told me? She didn't talk to her daughter for a whole week. Now, so if you don't know you're a controller, why do I think it's so important? Because, my friends, you got to know how much fear is running your life. See, fear is the most dangerous of all emotions. We get into more trouble through fear than anything else. The more we feed fear, the bigger the fear gets. The longer we keep the fear inside of us, the harder it is to get rid of. Fear of death, fear of illness, fears of being alone, fears of failure, economic insecurity, fears of abandonment, fears about our children or our grandchildren. Fear, it's very important, my friends, for each one of you to know how filled of fear you are. Because believe me, that gets us into more trouble. Fear of abandonment. That gets us into more trouble than anything in the world. Remember what Roosevelt said? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And there's an awful lot of truth to that. Now, my friends, I have what I call my turning over prayer. It's one of the most powerful prayers that I can ever say. Whenever I'm truly afraid, I face my fear down with faith. You see, when you try not to think about what you're afraid of, you're only going to feed the fear. And the more you try not to think about it, the more you're feeding fear. I face my fear down with faith. I pray to God that what I fear the most will happen if it's meant to be. Now, I'm not praying for it to happen, but I'm praying that if it does happen, surrender is acceptance. I can accept it happening, not because I want it to happen, but I have faith that God's love will take care of me. It's God's love inside of me that gives me the freedom to take life on life's terms. Otherwise, I'm going to spend my life fighting reality, and my life is going to be filled with stress. You see, I don't have a God that's up in the heavens planning how he's going to make life difficult on me. Life gets me into the desert. It's God's love that pulls me out. I've got to give my fears to God. Now, let me give you a good concrete example. This happened to me quite a few years ago, but I was given a mission down in Southern California. And two guys came to me. They said, "Father, we're in the television business, and we think public television is ready for a program on spirituality." And they wanted me to be part of the pilot program. Have any of you ever seen Bradshaw? Covert, Bailey, Fitter, Fat, Bill Moyers? There's a lot of marvelous shows on public television, and they thought our nation was ready for something on spirituality. And they wanted me to be part of the pilot program. Well, when they invited me, I got really excited. I realized in 1 hour of work, I could reach many more millions of people of doing what I'm doing now in many lifetimes. In fact, you know what I thought? My ego started to get big. I'm going to get famous. I'm going to be able to walk through airports, and people are going to know who I am. In fact, you know what I thought of? Another Bishop Sheen. See, the church hasn't had anybody since Bishop Sheen. I even wondered how I'd look in a cape. But I was going to be filmed in a large auditorium in Long Beach. They had sold 5,000 tickets. Well, it's going to be filmed on a Saturday. Well, the Saturday before I was to give this talk, I went to Atlanta, Georgia, to give a mission. I walk into the rectory, and all 3 priests have walking pneumonia. I don't know if any of you are worst scenario people, but if the worst can happen, I know what's going to happen to me. I started thinking that way. I started feeding fear. I started thinking to myself, you know, when I get into an airplane and I'm a little sick, by the time I get out of the airplane, I'm really sick. And the day before I was to give the talk, I had to fly all the way from Atlanta, Georgia to LAX. I could even see the germs coming after me. I was getting crazier by the moment. Tuesday, I wake up with the old sore throat. So it's not fear anymore, it's panic. I run to the doctors, I got a B12 shot. I was popping vitamin C's like they were M&Ms. I was getting crazier by the moment. Well, I want you to notice, on Wednesday, I brought it to prayer. But what I want you to notice, I didn't bring it to prayer on Sunday. I didn't even bring it to prayer on Monday or Tuesday. I waited to Wednesday. See, I never go right to God. I got to allow myself to be nuts a few days before I finally go to God. And I made this prayer. And sometimes this prayer takes a lot of faith and a lot of courage. I said, Father, if it's meant to be that I'm to get sick and I'm not able to do the TV show, let it be. Surrender is acceptance. I could accept that happening, not because I wanted it to happen, but I had faith that God's love would take care of me. And you know what happened, my friends? When I make this prayer sincerely, and I really am willing to give it to God, you know what God does? He takes the fear from me. I gave it to God. I was at peace with whatever's going to happen. I didn't get sick. But you know what? I'll bet you that if I gave in to fear, I would have gotten sick. I don't think there's anything that gets us sicker than stress. As I said last night, there's a tremendous connection between our bodies and our souls. In fact, you know, I had a cancer specialist tell me recently that our bodies constantly create cancer cells. And it's our immune system that fights off the cancer cells. Well, you know what the worst thing in the world for an immune system is? A lot of stress. That's why I truly believe that the greatest medicine in the world is a deep faith in God's love and presence in our life. My friends, I think that's the greatest medicine in the world. I gave it to God. I didn't get sick. I did it. It's one of the best jobs I've ever done. When I was finished, they gave me a standing ovation. It's never been distributed. Have any of you ever seen it on television? You know why? The microphones were faulty. And they didn't have enough money to redo the project. You know, I thought a lot about that since then. But you know what, my friends? I've known a lot of people that got famous. And then when they got famous, they started thinking they were better than other people. And they got themselves into real trouble. Maybe the best way I do my ministry is parish to parish, person to person. It was good enough for Jesus Christ. I don't know why it can't be good enough for me. It just was not meant to be. Now that's my experience. I'm going to get back into your experience now. I need you to be real honest with yourselves. When somebody tries to control you, your spouse, your parents, your children, a close friend, a brother or sister, when somebody tries to control you, don't you want to do the opposite? We hate to be controlled. And so how do we react when somebody tries to control us? We want to do the opposite. You know, my mom and dad, whenever they were going on a trip, my mom was very slow and my dad was very impatient. So my dad always thought that if he got out in the car and he honked the horn a few times, he'd get my mom to hurry. You know what my mom was doing while he was honking the horn? She was washing the dishes for the 5th time. Checking the bathrooms for the 6th time. The more my dad wanted her to hurry, the slower she went. That's why they always started their trips angry at each other. Are you following me? You know, this is the honest to goodness truth. Whenever I'm going on a trip with my mom and I want her to hurry, you know what I do? I slowly sit there and read the newspaper like I haven't got a care in the world. And next thing I know, my mom's waiting for me in the car. If my mom had any idea I was trying to hurry her, we leave about a half hour later. You follow me? We hate to be controlled. I was at a parish in Phoenix. They had a Sunday morning 6 a.m. Mass. Imagine that. 6 o'clock in the morning. You know, people that wanted a quickie. No music, just get it over with. And I'd start to preach. About 5 minutes into my homily, right in front of me, they'd look at their watch. About 5 minutes later, right in front of me, they start shaking their watch. You know what I did? I just went longer. The absolute truth was, I preached my longest sermons at the 6 a.m. Mass. That's the absolute truth. Now, my friends, I hope you can see this. If you give in to fear, you will control somebody you love. And when you control them, you're probably going to push them into what you fear the most. For example, if your kids aren't going to church, every time you make them feel more guilty, they want to go to church less. If one of your kids is married to somebody or dating somebody that you don't approve of, every time you express your disapproval, they like the person more. Now that's the truth. Now I don't have a lot of time tonight, and if you have a lot of fear issues, I recommend week 3. That's the one with the red cover. That's 5 hours on the journey from fear to faith. But tonight I'm going to just mention the fear that I hear most often from people. Fear about their kids and their grandkids. And there's a lot of reasons to be afraid. When I finished as Dean of Discipline at a high school, I told myself I knew too much. I told myself that if I were married and I had a daughter and she were going out on a date, I'd be sitting in the back seat with a shotgun. And that was in the 70s. Now, you know, there's a lot of reasons to be afraid. I've noticed 3 generations in my lifetime. There was my dad's generation. He grew up in the Depression. My dad worked 2 jobs while he was in grade school to put food on the table, to feed his mom and his grandma. And tough times made for tough men. My dad was a dictator. That generation expected a lot out of their kids. And you know what they created? The responsible generation. That's my generation. I've been on the road for 19 years, almost 20, and you know what, my friends? I've never missed a talk. I've gotten out of sick bed to give a talk. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's the way I was raised. We, the responsible generation, we did everything for our kids. We've created the me generation. You know, a good example, my generation was so responsible that we went to work when we were sick. So you know what they gave us? They gave us sick leave. So we didn't have to feel guilty when we were sick. The modern generation comes along and they make sick leave vacation time. That's what I'm trying to say. Have you ever wondered, what is the me generation going to create? What kind of families? You know, if you study the histories of the cultures of the world, you're going to discover that whenever there's been a breakdown in the family system, there's been a destruction of the culture. Have you ever wondered what kind of families are going to be created by kids who don't have family meals? Or kids that grow up without family activities? Do you ever wonder what kind of families they're going to create? If you think television has done a lot of damage, wait till you see what the internet has done. I know kids today that are being raised by the internet. You know? I just discovered 3 years ago that I have ADD, attention deficit disorder. See, I never knew I had it when I was a kid. You know why? Because I lived in a simple world. There wasn't a lot of stress. I'd had so much fun with my grandparents. I loved being with my grandparents. You know, they made life so wonderful. Our neighborhood, our family, you know, was so simple. Even with my dad's alcoholism, the world was simple. And I developed a lot of discipline, so I didn't need any medicine. I got through my grades. I learned to handle it because I grew up in a simple world. I think today all the kids have ADD. You know, I talk to the 1st and 2nd graders, and it's like talking to hummingbirds. And you know why I think it is, my friends? I think because of all the stress today, it brings the worst out of us. I grew up at a time that brought the best out of us. Now, You know what I've noticed today? I've noticed, and it's not the kids' fault. I'd be the same way. I think we created a generation of kids that think they're entitled. You know, I look at so many young people today, they started a house that took their parents their whole lives to achieve. And they start there. And they think they're entitled to it, you know? I look at so many kids I know that are driving expensive cars, but they're one paycheck away from bankruptcy, you know? I think, wonder what's going to happen. Well, you know, I don't know if any of you have ever read F. Scott Fitzgerald. Remember he wrote The Great Gatsby? Well, his subject matter was the materialism of the 20s, the shallow lives of the 20s. You know what happened? We had a depression, and people needed each other. People had to hang together, and we created the generation that defeated Nazism. Do you think we would have defeated Nazism if we didn't have the depression? In fact, I remember the old-time Jesuits, you know, they used to tell us the greatest time in the Jesuit order was during the Depression. Why? Because we all needed each other. We had to hang together. And then times got better, everybody got their own cars, and everybody went in all different directions. And we didn't need each other anymore. You know, my friends, I know that materialism doesn't work. If materialism worked, we'd be the happiest culture in the world. We wouldn't have a 50% divorce rate. We wouldn't have so many drug addiction and alcoholism. We wouldn't have so many suicides. Materialism doesn't work. Now, I'm sure that if you were ever to write your life story before you lived it, you never would have put the cross in it. And you know what? You never would have found God. And I'm sure as good parents, that if you were to write your kid's life story before they lived it, that you would have never put the cross in it. And you know what? They would have never found God. I don't know what's going to happen in this generation. I just have a feeling that this is the first generation that's going to have less than their parents that has come along in a long time. Remember in the Japanese economy? Remember when they told us it was the envy of the world? They're in their 14th year of recession. And some people talk about them having a depression, a 20s-like depression in their economy. I don't know what's going to happen in our country. Maybe the problems are going to be economic. Maybe they're going to be this terrorism. It might be natural disasters. All I know, just when these 9 people were survived last weekend, how these 9 people brought together the whole community. I believe Americans are wonderful people. We have big hearts. But you know, sometimes, my friends, it takes tragedies to bring it out of us. I don't know what's going to happen, my friends, but I know that there's going to be a bottom. And you see, the more you have faith that God's love is within you, the more faith you have that God's love is within your kids. They're not all alone out there. They were created in God's image just like we were. God is with them just like God has been with us. And if you really have believed and you see in your life where God has been with you in your darkest moments, you're going to know that God is going to be with your kids in their darkest moments. They may not be very interested in religion or spirituality or God or Jesus Christ now because maybe they're busy being yuppies. But there's going to come a day when it's going to fall apart for them. And that's when they're going to be open to grace. That's when they're going to be open to God's working in their life. You just have to believe. And if you believe it for yourself, you will believe it for your kids. That they are not all alone out there. But that God's love is always with them. Now, when you get afraid for your kids, pray the prayer of faith. Pray that what you fear the most, name what you're afraid of, that it will happen if it's meant to be. And what you're saying, even if this thing you're so afraid of will happen, you know that God's love is going to be with your kids. That God's going to be there to take care of them. And you know what you're going to do? You're going to let them go. You're going to give them to God. But you know what happens? If you give in to fear and you start controlling them, you're going to mess the works up. So it all depends, my friends, on the kind of faith you have for yourself, whether you have that faith for your kids or not. You know, there's nothing that all of us seek more than our life than inner peace. There is only one reality that can give us inner peace: when we truly believe that God loves us. That gives us the freedom to accept reality as it is. Otherwise, we're going to spend our lives fighting reality, and our lives are going to be filled with stress. You know, people ask me, am I happy? Some days I'm happy, some days I'm not happy. The Giants lose, the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks win, I'm unhappy. The 49ers win and Dallas loses, I'm happy. Happiness comes and goes. But what I do have in my life is inner peace. No matter what happens to me, I know that God's love is there to take care of me. That faith is the only thing in this world that can give us inner peace. Now, before I come back to the last, I have my ending of the talk to give you kind of the very important part. I'd like Don to say a few words.
Evening, everybody. I just, you know, he's talking about fear and faith. He was talking about fear and faith, and I looked down the aisle here, and I didn't see the red light on the camera. And I thought, oh no, because I know he wouldn't want to go through this again, but it was the strap in the way, so I was just like, thank you, Lord. I wanted to, we're talking about fear and faith, and I think, you know, for me as a fireman, I got to go back to ground zero after September 11th, and I think our society in general is more afraid. And for me, I've seen how I handled when I was, usually when I was uncomfortable, and I didn't even realize I was afraid. I was uncomfortable. And you know what I did? I went to a good distraction. You know, whatever that was. It could be work, it could be football, sports, love, whatever. I ran from being uncomfortable. And I didn't pay attention to that. And to me, that's God's calling card. In fact, Jesus, before he died on the cross, he greeted people often with, "Be not afraid." And after he died and came back, resurrected, he greeted people with, "Peace be with you." So even he had to go through the fear and to get to the peace. But if I'm running from it all the time, looking for a comfort zone, I don't face my fears, and as a result, I don't have that peace that surpasses all understanding. And for me, that was driven home in one of my deserts. About 8 years ago, I went in for knee surgery. I'd hurt my leg at work, and it was a routine outpatient surgery. I had the surgery done, and I got out, and it was Valentine's Day, and I remember it was kind of raining, and I'm thinking, well, I need to get my wife a card. Not thinking I shouldn't be driving, but that's a whole different story. So I go up to get the card, and I slipped and fell right out in front of the store and ripped it all open again. They had to put some hardware in, and a couple weeks later, I had to go back in and have it removed. Well, in the process of getting it removed, I came home, and I'm playing with the kids and the dog, and I started to feel really nauseous. And I'm thinking they left something in the leg. So I go to a different hospital to get a second opinion of what's going on. And this happened like on Saturday. And by Wednesday, I'm in ICU. And it turns out my legs started turning black. And then this leg started turning black. And my hands started turning black. And I had that flesh-eating bacteria that was real popular kind of back 8 years ago. I heard of, but 2 people in Phoenix got it that year, and I was one of them. And the other one didn't make it. So I was really, really sick. And I remember thinking that I was going to die. I had that sense of impending doom. And a lot of things go through my mind about my life and how I lived. Well, fortunately for me, they bring in a doctor, and 30 days later and 17 surgeries later, I get out of the hospital. I end up having a lot of disability for a while. And I didn't like that because that's how I dealt with a lot of my stress. You know, we get active, and I was pretty sports-minded, and I couldn't do everything I once did. And I was uncomfortable, and I didn't know how to face that. Now, but I noticed that if I took the pain medicine, it went away, that feeling of discomfort. Well, at 38 years old, I did this over and over again, and the obvious thing would happen is that I got addicted to narcotics. And I had a lot of reasons, a lot of excuses, and sometimes I do that. I rationalize, and I make excuses, and I minimize what's going on that's making me uncomfortable, and I don't ask for help. And in this case, it almost killed me. And I didn't want to, I thought, I work helping people for a living. I work with the church. I was mad about it all. But eventually that brokenness is what brought me to God. And I think God's calling card oftentimes is pain. If I can just pay attention to it. And if I can grow from, and I can ask for help. And that was driven home to me with my addiction. And so a big part of life's journey, for me anyway, is to say if you know anybody in your circle that's struggling, having gone through it, I certainly know places to go and people to talk to, and we have a webpage and you can contact us there. The second thing I wanted to mention was the preoccupation, trying to find a distraction. And, I have to check, because if I go too long here, we'll go too long. But this preoccupation sometimes we're not conscious of it. To become conscious is what I think our faith's about, become aware. And that was driven home in another little tale I'll share with you. I fly small planes, and in flying small planes, I was going to fly my children someplace, and I was worried about an argument that I was having with my wife at the time, and I wasn't thinking about flying. Hadn't flown in a little while, and I remember getting in the plane and was going to turn the key to, when your car hasn't been driven, you have to make sure the battery's good. Well, you do the same in a plane. Well, I turned the key and I saw that it was going to turn the prop, so I jumped out, still not really being present. And I ran around, pulled the plane out, and was checking it out. And when you got to the prop, you're supposed to pull it a little, and I pulled it a little, and that prop started the plane. And I mean, it's 300 horsepower, and when you shut a plane off, you leave the throttle in. Well, it started up, and I have never prop started a plane before or since. And I'm fortunate that it didn't take my head off. Well, I get around the wing, and I get to the door, and it's going, and I'm running, and I can't get in the door. And my 6-year-old's in front, and my 4-year-old's in back, and I remember as I'm running, they're looking at Dad, and I jump on the tail. Now we're going this way in between the hangars, and I remember seeing a guy at one of the hangars, and as we went by, his mouth was agape, and my kids are looking back at me, and if God's grace, if He never does another thing, He told me in so many words in my head to pull on the rudder, and I pulled on the rudder, and we caught the last hangar because there was an open field in front of us, and we would have been flying with me on the tail. We wouldn't have landed very well. Anyway, I remember thinking, now I'm paying attention. Now I'm right where I'm at. And the plane buries into the hangar, and I reach inside, and I shut the key off, and I'm like a big weeping mess. And I look back at my kids, and I said, "Are you okay, kids?" And they said, "Oh, well, sure, Dad." And my son goes, "Dad, I didn't know you could fly it from back there." So today, when I get preoccupied about desires or about fear especially, I try to pay attention. And that, for me, I think is the key to being able to ask for help, is if we can pay attention to being uncomfortable and then decide if it's fear or anger and then share that with somebody else. God's grace has a chance to work in our life. And I know it works, and that's why I'm here, is to share that with you. So you can rise the next time you get uncomfortable. Pay attention to it. Don't run to a distraction. And share it with somebody, and miracles can happen. Thank you very much.
Make sure I'm in the right place now. Finally tonight, I'd like to share with you my meaning of heaven and my meaning of hell. because it's built on everything I've been talking about tonight. But I believe that anyone who's ever discovered real love believes in eternal life. Because whenever we truly love someone, we not only want to love that person for a day, a year, even a lifetime. We want to love that person forever. And when two people truly love each other, they have their special moments in their love when they experience God's presence. They may not have many moments of light, but it's those moments that keep people going during the dark times. That's why I truly believe that once we've discovered real love, we're ready to go home, because we've discovered what life is all about. People who live life the most fear death the least. People who live life the least fear death the most. Our greatest fear in life is to die without ever discovering God, without ever discovering love. I believe the whole reason why God created us, it wasn't to live in Lafayette, it wasn't to be married, it wasn't to have family, it wasn't to be successful. But the whole reason why God created us was to discover the love that's inside of us and to share it with the people that God sends into our life. And once we enter into that love, we enter into eternal life, because God is love, and God can never die, and love can never die. I believe that when each one of us returns to God, we're going to be united with all the people we've loved in our lifetime and all the people that have loved us. And we're going to live in that love forever. God is love, and God can never die, and love can never die. I'm not sharing this with you because I've been taught eternal life. I'm sharing this with you because this has been my experience of love. One of the most blessed events of my life was the death and burial of my father. See, for many years I preached at funerals much of what I just shared with you. But I always wondered, what was it going to be really like when I had to bury one of my parents? It was an amazing experience. Oh, we were deeply saddened. We were really going to miss our dad. But there was no heavy gloom. There was no deep depression. There was inner joy. There was inner peace. And there was an awful lot of laughter. You know why? Because everybody in our family, each in our own way, we just knew that the kind of love that we had in our family, that kind of love had to be forever. There wasn't one of us that doubted it. In fact, my sister is not a churchgoer. She recently told me, she said, "Tom, I haven't been afraid to die ever since we buried Dad." Everything I believe about the resurrection was verified in the death and burial of my father. In fact, my brothers and sisters, there's nothing that's prepared me more for my own faith in eternal life than the death and burial of my father. That love is forever. My notion of hell: before there's life, there's nothing. We come into life when we're a persona our whole lives. We never discover God's love within. We never share that love with another. We're a spectator as we watch our life pass us by. And then we die, and they put us in a coffin. There was nothing before, there's nothing during, and there's nothing after. What is hell but the absence of God, the absence of love? And I don't think it's something that happens to us after we die. I believe each one of us today is choosing our own heaven or our own hell. And it all depends upon where we place our faith. Whether we place our faith in a spiritual dimension which will live forever, or we place our faith in the material dimension which will die with our bodies.
Amen.
But here's the good news. None of us will ever become perfectly spiritual. We never get there. It's a journey. It's progress, not perfection. And my prayer for each one of us tonight is, when we honestly ask ourselves that question of where have we placed our faith, that each one of us may honestly be able to say, by golly, I am becoming more spiritual, and less material. May each one of you be able to say that. God bless you. Thank you for coming. I promise you the last talk tomorrow night is the best of the mission. I remember when I was a little boy, I tried very hard to be holy. In fact, you know, I went to Mass for 3 Sundays and Easter Sunday. You know why? Plenary indulgence. I went to 3 Masses on All Souls Day. I really tried to be holy. Then I got to the Jesuits, and they were getting real serious about making me holy. But you know what? I never knew what it meant to be holy. I was just pretty sure it was what I wasn't. Today we have a new word, and this word I do understand. Holiness is wholeness. That all of us are on a journey to become a whole person. And the more whole we become, the more holy we become. And it comes right from Scripture. You know, in the first chapter of Genesis, it has the famous story of creation, that God has created each one of us, or not, excuse me, God has created man in God's image, somebody like me, and woman from the rib of man, remember? They're male chauvinists right from the beginning. Well, in the next chapter of Genesis, it has a totally different story of creation. This one says that God has created each one of us, male and female, in God's image. Doesn't say God created a male, then God created a female. But God created each one of us, male and female. And to become a whole person, we have to integrate the male and female within us. Now, what I'm going to say about men's greatest challenge in becoming a whole person is true for most men, but it also can be applied to some women. And what I say about women's greatest challenge in becoming a whole person is true for most women, but it also can be applied to some men. So you're going to have to listen to me knowing the kind of energy you have inside of you. Let me take men first. Usually for a man, his greatest challenge in his life is to learn to develop his feminine energy, to learn to listen to his heart, to be able to share his love, to be able to be sensitive and tender. You know what happens to a man who never learns to listen to his heart? The older he becomes, the more moody he becomes, and he withdraws from life. You can always tell when you're bearing your feelings. It comes out in moodiness. And some of my most painful moments have been in either a room or a car with a moody man. You ladies, you know what I'm talking about. Guys, if you want to know how much of a challenge this is for you, look at your fathers. If your fathers have died or if your father's getting older, how are they aging? You know the way it's supposed to be for a man? In the first part of a man's life, he works on the outer world. He supports his family. He builds his career. In the latter part of a man's life, he works on the inner world, the world of the heart. That's why so many fathers are much better grandfathers than they were fathers. They bond with their kids. They become friends with their kids. They bond with their grandkids. But you know what happens if a man doesn't do that? As I said, the older he becomes, the more moody he'll become. Now, when you look at your fathers, did your fathers become more a part of the family the older they got? Or did they withdraw from life? If you look at your dads, you're going to know how much of a challenge this is going to be for you. You know, there's another indication of this also. Some of you just came in later. I'm not using a microphone because it's distorted here. So if you can't hear me, move up. There's plenty of room up here. So so you're really welcome to do that. Now, you know there's a high statistical average that when the wife dies first, the husband usually quickly follows, or he's married 2 months later. But if the husband dies first, the wife has a normal lifespan. You know why the difference? If the man doesn't develop his own emotional life, if he doesn't build his own support system of love, the older he becomes, the more dependent upon the woman he becomes. So he literally can't live without her. I know an awful lot of families that are praying that dad goes first because they don't know how dad can make it without mom, but they think mom can make it without dad. Do you follow me so far? Let's go on to the next level. What's the greatest challenge for a woman if a woman's going to become a whole person? She has to develop her male energy. You know what that means? Her assertiveness as a woman. Now, there's a big difference between an assertive woman and an aggressive woman. An assertive woman comes from self-esteem. An aggressive woman comes from anger. You know, Sunday nights used to be my favorite night of watching television. I'd watch 60 Minutes, and then I'd watch Murder, She Wrote. Some of you remember that show? Well, I think Angela Lansbury, she was the actress, and Jessica Fletcher, she was a character in the series. I think she's exactly what I was talking about. She was very assertive, but she was also very feminine. So what do I mean when I say that a woman has to become assertive? I mean that she has to make her own relationship with herself her most important relationship she has in her life. So she develops a personal life. She develops a spiritual life. She builds her own support system of friends. She builds her own hobbies, her own interests. I think of my mom who had her first art class when she was 60 and her first exhibit when she was 65. And all I can remember her doing when I was a kid was drawing Santa Clauses at Christmas. You know what happens to a woman who never builds her own personal life? Who always makes her husband or her children her personal life? Usually one of two things can happen. She either becomes a very angry woman, and she's angry at her husband because he didn't save her, or she becomes a very chatty person. She repeats all the things she's heard, but since it's not connected to a person inside, it comes out as chatter. How often have I seen it? The moody man married to the talkative woman. That's what happens when wholeness doesn't take place. Are you following me so far? Well, let's go on to the next level. Have you ever noticed in life that men struggle to understand women and women struggle to understand men? Have you ever noticed that? I used to belong to a racquetball club. In the men's locker room, if I heard it once, I heard it a million times. Women, you can't live with them, and you can't live without them. In fact, I had a guy come to me recently. He said, "Father, you know why women live longer than men?" I said, "No, why?" "They don't have wives." Now notice, that's not very complimentary to women. It's really passive-aggressive anger. It's humor with a barb. Now, ladies, I don't know if you know this, but you know, men, we have a lot of jokes that we tell each other about women. In fact, recently I was at a parish where every morning the sacristan of the parish had to tell me 3 or 4 women jokes every day. I was very anxious to meet his wife. In fact, I'm still praying for her. She really has her hands full, believe me. But I remember one of his jokes I thought was pretty cute. A guy's driving down the freeway about 80 miles an hour, and a cop sees him, puts a light on, puts a siren, starts chasing him. The guy goes up to 90, 100, the cop keeps chasing, goes up to 110. He finally realizes he's not going to get away. So he pulls over the side of the road, the cop pulls up behind him. You can imagine how angry the policeman is. He says, "Sir, why didn't you stop when I put the siren on?" And the guy said, officer, I'm so sorry. But last year, my wife ran off with a policeman. And I thought it was you, and you were bringing her back. Now that's male humor. But notice it's not very complimentary to women. In fact, you know something? The next time I get a ticket, I think I'm going to use it. You know how they always ask you, why are you driving so fast? What makes a man angry at a woman? See, a man, he loves his wife to cook a good meal, to keep the house clean, to make love. But don't get emotional on me. Whenever a woman gets emotional, a man wants to run the other way. I work hard all week. When I come home, I expect it to be peace and quiet. There you go again. You always have to get so emotional. A man will never come to understand the emotion within a woman until he understands the emotion within himself. Have you ever noticed the kind of guy that gives you that locker room talk, the dirty jokes that are degrading to women? That's the macho man. That's the man that hates his own emotions. And you know who he takes it out on? He takes it out on women. See, men, emotions are very transitory. I can love and hate the same person within the same 20 minutes. If a man doesn't understand his own emotions, he's always going to react to them in a woman like they're permanent, like they're forever. And you know something, my friends, my fellow males, especially for us, we were taught as kids how to feel. Our feelings were never valued. We were taught it's a sin to feel that way, or it's wrong to feel that way, or you shouldn't feel that way. So we don't understand our own emotions. Emotions are neither right nor wrong, but they say a lot about what's going on inside of me. So a man, instead of listening and understanding, accepting his wife's emotions, you know what he's doing? He's trying to fix her. A woman doesn't want to be fixed. She just wants to be listened to. Isn't that right, ladies? The added point, I just say how important this is, my friends, for men to get in touch with their own emotional life. You know something? I've grown as a human being. The only people I really trust are the people I can share my feelings with. If I have to tell you the feelings you want me to have, that's conditional love. Okay, you follow me, guys? It's so important. If we never understand our own emotional life, we're never going to understand women. Guys, women have problems with us too. You should hear how they talk about us when we're not there. How we don't get it. Isn't that right, women? How men just don't get it. I had a woman come to me recently. She said, "Father, I've got to tell a joke too on men." I thought it was pretty cute. She had this couple, they're both married 40 years. They're 60 years of age. And to celebrate their anniversary, they go down to San Diego just to spend a few days on the beach. While they're lying on the beach, this bottle washes up on shore, and they open the bottle, and out comes a genie. And the genie says, since you're both 60, you've been married for 40 years, and you're both 60 years of age, I'm going to grant to each one of you one wish. Turns to the woman first. What do you wish for? And she says, I wish I could have 2 tickets so my husband and I could travel around the world together. Zap, there were the 2 tickets. Then the genie turns to the guy. What do you wish for? He says, I wish I could be married to a woman 30 years younger than myself. Zap, he was 90 years of age. That's feminine humor. There's nothing that gets a woman angry at her husband than to see him look at all the young ladies. What gets a woman angry at a man? See, a man, he has his own personal life. He has his own freedom. A man can come and go as he wants. While oftentimes the woman, she's going to feel she's a prisoner of the home or a prisoner of the relationship. She's going to wait all day for that telephone call. A woman will never come to appreciate a man's need for his own personal life, for his own freedom, until she develops it for herself. As long as a person doesn't have her own personal life, she's always going to hate it in the man. You're going to find that the vast majority of conflicts between men and women center on the emotions of the woman and the freedom of the man. The more the man wants his freedom, the more emotional the woman becomes. And now he wants his freedom even more, and she becomes even more emotional. It's a vicious circle. And you know, my friends, after many, many years of marriage counseling, it's usually the one conflict that is never resolved in a marriage. And you know why it's never resolved? Because each person thinks it's the other person's problem. The man thinks the biggest problem in my marriage is I married a woman that was too emotional. If my wife had more discipline over her emotions, we'd have a much better marriage. That's not the real problem. The real problem is that the man hasn't developed his emotional life. That's the problem. The woman thinks, if only my husband liked to be around me as much as he does his work or his friends, I'd be happy. That's not the real problem. The real problem is that the woman has made the man her personal life. And she's put all kinds of obligations on him. Well, nobody wants to do what they have to do. She's made the problem worse. Do you all follow me? Do you ever wonder how a celibate priest figured all this out? It's the working of the Holy Spirit. Now, I should have said this in the beginning of my talk, and let me make this point very clear now. Just because I'm using examples from married life, this talk applies to all of you. Whether you're single, whether you're widowed, whether you're divorced, whether you're married, whether you're celibate. As long as you are either a man or a woman, this talk applies to you. So don't let my examples from married life throw you. I'm just giving you examples. Now, from everything I said, let's go on to the next step. Have you ever wondered why somebody falls in love? I'm sure it's happened to all of you at least once in your lifetime. You have your macho man. He's free and easy as a bird. And suddenly he's in love. He's singing in the shower. He's writing poetry. He's feeling feelings he's never felt before. He's in love. In fact, I taught American literature to junior boys in high school. And I always felt that I could never teach literature to a guy until he fell in love. Because when a guy falls in love, he discovers all kinds of things about his heart that he never knew was there. Gals, can you remember your husbands when they were in love with you? Remember how romantic they were? Did they write you poetry? Did they sing to you? Guys, can you remember when you were in love, how much you were in touch with your heart? Remember? The woman, she meets her Savior in his white Camaro, and suddenly she feels so powerful. She can accomplish anything. The state of being in love. It's probably one of the most exciting things that can happen to any of us. And you know why it's so exciting to be in love? Because when a man's in love, he feels very whole. He's very much in touch with his heart. He's just filled with love. The woman, she feels very powerful. She believes that she and her man can conquer the world. There's nothing that can come between us. The state of being in love. Have you ever tried to break up a couple that were in love? Maybe one of your kids? You thought they were too young or they weren't right for each other? You'd have a better chance of getting our present Pope to ordain women. Because they always have to be together to feel this wholeness. Because when they're separated, they feel lonely and possessive and jealous. So they always have to be together. The state of being in love. It's a marvelous time in our life, it really is. But there's only one problem about it. It lasts on an average of about 18 months. And very often the couple has gotten married in the meantime. And they each wake up one day and they realize they married an ordinary human being just like themselves. In fact, when loveness wears off, so many marriages begin to go on the rocks. They each down deep think they made a mistake. Ah, she's too much like her mother. Or I thought he'd be different after we got married. And the wife gets involved with the kids, and the husband gets involved with his career. And they start to go their separate ways. You know, when I was a young priest in Phoenix, I got to know a lot of young families. And I was with them through the different sacramental stages of their life. I don't think I'm exaggerating, but I think over 60% of those couples got a divorce when the kids left the home. They had nothing in common. They lost the marriage while they had the kids. Here's the point I want to make. It is precisely when loveness wears off that love really begins. You see, loveness is not love. It's only the invitation to love, the motivation to love. But love is not primarily emotions, and love is certainly not dependency. Love is work. The opposite of love is laziness. Now, to sum all this up is the only thing I've ever made sense out of sexuality and spirituality. Remember I told you on Tuesday night that I've gotten no help growing up on sexuality except to feel guilty and shameful. In fact, you know what St. Ignatius of Loyola, he's the founder of the Jesuits. You know what he wrote in our rule books for Jesuits? Jesuits should have the sexuality of the angels. No more need to be said. Wasn't that wonderful? Boy, that sure helped me put things together. Remember I told you Tuesday, I think the great error in how we were taught sexuality is we were taught we have a body to have children instead of we are a body. There's an intimate connection between our bodies and our souls. And I talked about on Tuesday how we have to learn to listen to our bodies and how are our bodies telling us about our souls. See, I don't think there's any such thing as a sexual problem. I think it's a spiritual problem with a physical manifestation. Now, I do a lot of work in my anger tapes, week 2, about the connection between sex and anger. But I want to talk, this is one of these examples of how we listen to our bodies and what are our bodies telling us about our souls. Whenever we're attracted to somebody, whenever we're fascinated by somebody, whenever we become dependent on somebody, there's always a reason. But it's not primarily a physical reason. If we were primarily physical beings, we'd be the happiest culture in the world. We're primarily spiritual beings. So there's a spiritual reason why I'm attracted to somebody, why I'm fascinated by somebody, why I become dependent on somebody. And you know what that reason is? It's because that person has something in them that I need for my own wholeness. That's why I'm so attracted to them. That's why I'm fascinated by them. That's why I become dependent on them. They have something that I need. I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about anybody that we truly bond with. Let me share with you my story. Remember I told you Tuesday that my hardest cross in life is I'm too darn responsible. I grew up the oldest son in an alcoholic family. That my whole life is based on taking care of other people. You know what my hardest cross, you know what I'm trying to learn in my life? How to become irresponsible. You know what my motto is? Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. I'm not saying that's true for everybody. I know people that live that motto. But for me, it's true. If I think it's poor, it's probably just about right. So all my life, I put this pressure on myself. I have to be so responsible. Well, you see, I can never share my feelings. I can never tell you I was lonely, or I was afraid, or I was angry, or I was jealous, or I was depressed. I could never be any of those things because that wasn't being responsible. Well, you know the kind of people I've been attracted to all my life? Fascinated by, become dependent on? Free spirits, people who love just to be. You know why? Because I need to develop my own free spirit. I need to learn how to be. You know the kind of people free spirits are attracted to? Responsible people. That's what they need to develop. I could tell you horror stories when you mix that chemistry. I'll get into a work project with a free spirit, and you know what's happened after 4 months of working together? I'm doing everything and they're doing nothing. There's a reason why they're a free spirit. They don't do anything. I'm the kind of person that can feel guilty about everything. I got involved with people who felt guilty about nothing. Now here's the key. If I don't develop in myself what has attracted me to the other person, and who could teach me how to be a free spirit any more than a free spirit, and if they don't develop in themselves what has attracted them to me, and who could teach anybody how to be responsible any more than I could? If we don't develop in ourselves what has attracted us to each other, what has attracted us is eventually going to drive us apart. We're going to get in these big fights. I'm going to yell and scream at them because they're not doing anything. And they're going to yell and scream at me because I'm controlling everything. You know, I'm one of those people, I don't know if any of you like me, but there's a wrong way, and there's a right way, and there's my way. And then whenever I delegate to somebody, they don't quite do it my way. So that's only proof the only person that can do it right is me. You know what people think who work for somebody like me? If the old man wants to do everything, I'm going to let him do everything. Now here's the key, my friends. You know, I'm a fast learner. My dad was always very strong. You got to make lemonade out of lemons. And I try to learn. I hate to beat my head against the wall. So I'm a quick learner. But there's one thing in my life that I did hundreds of times, even though I failed every time, I kept doing it well into my 40s. You know what that was? Thinking that I can change you. Today, I absolutely believe that I cannot change you. I'm sure some of you have heard the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You know what that means? I can't change you. You can't change me. The only person I can change is me, and that's wisdom. We can never do it for each other. The greatest challenge in life is not learning to live with other people. The great challenge of life is learning to do it for ourselves. Each one of us has to be responsible for ourselves. You cannot do it for your spouse. But you know what happens? You become each other's best teachers. You know what the great enemy of relationships is? Insecurity. And you know what insecurity is? Insecurity is using the other person to fill up the hole inside of me. That's where all the silent treatments come from. That's where guilt games come from. They come from insecurity. I don't know where we've learned this. Maybe it came from our music. Maybe it came from romantic novels. Maybe it came from TV shows. But so many people today think that dependency is love. Dependency is not love. Dependency is using the other person to fill up the hole inside of me. I have actually heard people tell their spouse, You don't love me as much as I love you because you're not as dependent on me as I am on you. Dependency is not love. But you see, my friends, the more you become each other's best teachers, the more whole you become, the more independent you become. And that's how you become soulmates. Soulmates are a relationship between two independent people. You know why they're soulmates? Because there isn't a lot of insecurity. There's not a lot of games. There's not a lot of ups and downs. And you see, the more whole you become, the less dependent you are. Do you follow me? That, my friends, is my program for recovery from codependency. That's what codependency is, using the other person to fill up the hole inside of me. Let me give you an example. Don and I have been working this week. I met Don 20 years ago. He was a free-spirited paramedic in the fire department. Don loved to play. He loved to golf. He loved to surf. There wasn't enough hours in a day to play. I was Mr. Responsibility. You know what's happened after 20 years of working together? He has become much more responsible. He's helped put our website together. He's doing this video. He's going back to Kansas City and edit it and get it out. He's writing a book. He's planning our next project. Don has become much more responsible over the years. You know what I've done? I've become much more playful. Don is planning our next project. I'm planning my next vacation. That's the truth. That's how it's worked in our relationship. I had taught him how to become more responsible, and he's taught me how to become more playful. That's how relationships work. Have you ever known the man who couldn't live without a woman? His wife dies, and he's married 2 months later. That's the man that's never developed his own emotional life. So he always has to get a woman to be his emotional life. Have you ever known the woman who couldn't live without a man, who always has to have a man in her life? That's the woman that's never developed her own personal life, so she always has to get a man to be her personal life. So you all follow me? Well, from everything I've said, I'd like to end my mission with what a man has to do and what a woman has to do when the in-loveness wears off to become a whole person themselves and to build soulmate relationships. Let me take men first. Most men have the emotions of John Wayne, sex and anger, and they're connected. There's a real connection between sex and anger. You put a lot of anger into your body, and your body has to release the tension, so it creates sexual energy. Now, why are men so angry? If any of you have ever read any sociology or psychology today, they talk about the tremendous anger in the American male. But you know, you don't have to read sociology or psychology. All you have to do is turn on the radio. Listen to all the negative talk shows. In fact, I recently gave a mission in Las Vegas, and I turned the radio on, and I counted 7 negative talk shows. The anger in the American male has created a whole new industry of negative talk shows. Now, why are men so angry? You know, Rollo May, who just recently died in Marin County, he wrote, I believe, one of the greatest books ever written in our country, a book called Love and Will. It's a great classic. It's a kind of book you meditate on. In his section, when he talks about families, he makes this observation about fathers. He said most fathers, when they plan out their families, they use the corporate model on how to be a father. They plan out their children's lives like they're commodities. They give their children advice, but they never listen. They give their kids things, but they never share their hearts. And Rollo May says, is most men are angry at their fathers because their fathers never shared their hearts with their sons. And it's passed on from generation to generation. And that was certainly true in my case. Now, guys, I believe anger is our issue. So I need you now to be real honest with yourselves. How much do you have to be in control? How much do you get nervous when you're not in control? Then you're in that cycle I mentioned last night of fear, control, anger. How about this? Can you get out and drive on the freeway without getting angry? If a car pulls in front of you, do you react like they've been planning to do it for weeks? It's not the other driver that gets you so angry. You're already angry. They just get you in touch with the anger. Can you talk about the politicians without getting angry? I don't know why we've never discovered this in America, but in democracy, we always get the politicians we deserve. They want to get reelected. It's not the politicians we're so angry at. We're already angry. They just get us in touch with the anger. Now here's the key. This is a key, guys. This is really, be honest now. Especially with your wife, if you're married. When you talk about the children or finances, do you argue or do you discuss? Now there's a gigantic difference between an argument and a discussion. An argument has nothing to do with the truth. It has everything to do with being in control. It's an ego thing. A discussion is about the truth, wanting to know the truth. Now, when you talk to your wife about money, do you argue or do you discuss? You know, my friends, I've learned in my life that you never win an argument, because an argument isn't about truth. And you know what I've discovered? Whenever I find myself in an argument, I try to get out of it as fast as I can. And you know how I get out of it? I learned something from my mom. My dad grew up in the Depression, and he always had to be right. You know how my mom got out of an argument? She used to say to my dad, "Honey, you may be right. You may be right," she'd say to him. You know what she was saying to him? "You're darn wrong, but I don't want to talk about it anymore." And he never caught on. You know something? I love to discuss politics and religion with people that disagree with me. I love to discuss it, because that's how we learn from each other. None of us have all the truth. But you know, today, unfortunately, my friends, it usually always ends in an argument, because people have to be right. I remember in the Jesuits, you know, you'd have your young liberals in their early 20s. They were wild liberals. They thought they had all the answers. And they never listened to anybody. And by the time they got in their 60s, they were arch conservatives. So just be honest now. Do you find yourself arguing or discussing? If you argue a lot, you have a lot of anger in you. And here's the problem, guys. If you bury your anger, you bury your love. You have to release that anger in order to get in touch with the love. Now, I'm going to share with you my personal story, and maybe it will help you in your own journey. But people could think I had my life pretty well together. Then I could enter my parents' home, and I suddenly became this 15-year-old. I spent all my energy trying to please my father, and he spent all his energy telling me how to please him. I'd be sitting there having dinner with my folks. My dad would look over and say, "Son, you're eating too fast." Or I'd take him out for a drive, and you think I was in driver's ed. And the crazy part of it was I was in my 50s, and I didn't need a father, and he was in his 70s, and he didn't need a son. We needed somehow to become friends. Well, I remember my dad had a fishing boat and a houseboat over at the Delta. And I went about 3 or 4 times with the explicit purpose. I went fishing with my dad for a whole weekend, because this weekend we break through the walls and we become friends. Well, you know what had happened? My dad had pushed one of my buttons. And my dad knew which buttons to push. He put them there in the first place. My dad could get me angrier faster than anybody in the world. And you know what? I leave more angry than when I came. Now, I work on spiritual models, is what I created in my head. And my dad was getting sicker. He wasn't going to be around very long, and I somehow had to become friends. Now, it's my second talk of week 2. I did a 4-step process in which I forgave my dad. And in the process, you know what I discovered? My dad would have done it to any son he had. I quit taking it personally. Now, I want to tell you something, how that set me free. When I discovered, my heart discovered, my head might have known it, but my heart had to see it, that my dad would have done it to any son he had. I found a tremendous release inside of me of anger that I've carried all my life. And you know the beautiful thing, my friends? I used to be one of those people that was easily hurt, overly sensitive. You know why? It was all based on taking my parents personally. And when I let go of taking them personally, I've let go of taking everybody else personally. You know what my 2 great freedoms in life? I know I can't change you, and I don't take you personally. Those are the 2 great freedoms that I've discovered in life. And you know what happened, my friends? When I let go of that anger from my childhood, that's when I got in touch with the love inside of me. That's when I discovered God as love. That's when I really experienced it on the inside. I tell my Jesuit friends, that's the day I became a Franciscan. See, Jesuits are more in their heads, and Franciscans are more in their hearts, you know? Really, that's what happened to me. Now, I never shared this with my father. He wouldn't have known what I was talking about. But I discovered that when he suddenly changed, when I suddenly changed, he suddenly changed. You know why? He wasn't reacting to my anger anymore. And I'll never forget, I've been friends with my dad 7 or 8 months. And we took trips together when we became friends, because we liked each other. And one day my dad said to me, "Son, you used to be so angry at me." And you know what? The crazy thing, I thought he was angry at me. One of the greatest gifts God has given me has been a friendship with my dad. And in the process, I let go of all this anger. What a wonderful gift. You know, the biggest problem that I run into week after week in giving these missions, women will come to me and they'll say, "Father, I'm growing spiritually, but my husband isn't. And I don't know what that's going to do to our marriage." And that's true. Women tend to grow a lot more spiritually than men do. You know why I think that is? A man's greatest fear is the fear of failure. And if a man doesn't overcome that fear, he's going to spend his whole life in the marketplace. And you know what he's going to have to show for 40 years in the marketplace? An ulcer and a gold watch. A woman's greatest fear is the fear of loneliness. So she's going to tend to spend her energy around people, and you're going to grow a lot more from people than you are from the marketplace. I spent 12 wonderful years in Arizona, despite the heat. And I got to know a lot of men in corporate America. In 1989 and 1990, they had a recession in their economy. They even had a depression for many people. I knew men that lost everything they worked their whole lives to achieve. And I'd reach out to them, not only as their priest, but their friend. "Can I help you? Can I be with you?" "Oh, no, Father. Don't worry about me. I have it all under control." That was the operative word. I have it all under control. I watched men, they could play cards together, they could play golf together, but they didn't know how to share their hearts together. I was never so grateful to be a priest than my dad's last Sunday alive. It happened to be my parents' 54th anniversary. So I presided over Mass, and during the Mass, my parents renewed their vows. And after the Mass, my dad invited each one of us to talk to him individually, to say goodbye. And the next day, my dad died. My dad had a beautiful death. I'll never forget the last couple of weeks, lying on his bed. He had this beautiful smile. His eyes were so peaceful. And he'd look over at my mom and he'd say, "Honey, we have such a beautiful family. We have so much love in our family. Honey, we're so blessed." You know what my dad's greatest consolation on his deathbed? that he was surrounded with a family that knew and loved him and a family that he knew and loved. It was my dad's greatest consolation. I thought to myself, how lonely would it be for my dad to be on his deathbed, surrounded with a family that didn't know him and a family that he didn't know. What a terribly lonely way to die. Men, the greatest gift you give your spouse, the greatest gift you give your children, it's not providing for them, it's not giving them things, it's not leaving them things. The greatest gift you give your spouse, the greatest gift you give your children is the gift of yourself. That's the gift that lasts forever. Love is work. The opposite of love is laziness. And finally, what do women have to do when the unlovedness wears off? My mom's a great example. It took my dad 5 years to die. You know that time in your life when you know you're never going to get any better. He first had cardiac arrest, then he had open heart surgery, and eventually got melanoma. My mom gave up her personal life. She gave up her painting. She gave up going out with her friends so she could be there totally 24 hours a day for my dad. And I know that my mom gave my dad a couple extra years of life. But when my dad finally died, my mom went into this deep, deep depression. I mentioned on Monday. You know why? Because she had given up her personal life. Her personal life had been taking care of my father. So for a whole year after my dad died, my mom used to talk to my dad's pictures. Now it's gotten much better for my mom. Oh, she's never going to be at peace until she's together with my dad forever. They had that kind of a marriage. But you know, it's gotten much better for my mom. The more she's gotten back to her painting, the more she goes out with her friends, the more she develops a personal life, the more she's enjoying life because she has one. My mom's a miracle. I came home from the road recently and I discovered that my mom became a Eucharistic minister for 4 shut-ins in our parish, that she visits every week, and you know what? They're all younger than she is. She signed up at County Hospital to hold crack babies twice a month. My mom is 86 years of age. You know, people say, oh, Father, I'm just too old to change. No one is too old to change. They just don't want to change. You know the real miracle for my mom? We used to ask her to do things, and she always gave us the reasons why she couldn't. You know what's changed now? Now she gives us the reasons why she can. You know why? Because she has a personal life. See, the more you have a personal life, the more you're going to enjoy it because you have one. That's what your kids mean when they say, hey, Mom, get a life. What they're saying is, if you have a life, you're not going to make me your life. In fact, you know, with my mom, you know, it's amazing with the two of us that we are often confused for husband and wife. I live with her. I'm going home tonight to her in San Francisco. But we're often confused for husband and wife. You know, I was recently at a restaurant with my mom, and we were eating dinner and having a wonderful time. And some couple stopped on the way out of the restaurant. And they stopped at our table, and they said, we'd sure like to have a marriage like yours. You should have seen their shock when I said, this lady is my mother. But you know, I recently asked her, because she's in great health, doesn't have anything seriously wrong with her. Her mind is as sharp as a tack. She probably looks in her early 60s. And I said, Mom, why don't you get married? You know, I know how lonely the nights can be. You know, that shared joy, double joy, shared sorrow, half sorrow. I told her, you know, we're not meant to live alone. You know what her response was? I don't want to take care of another man. She said, I get married, and 6 months later he gets sick, and I spend the rest of my life taking care of him. You know what my mom told me? She's no longer a mom. She's a person. Her purpose in life is not to take care of people. Her purpose in life is to enjoy this beautiful gift of life that God has given her. She's no longer a mother. She's a person. You know, women, the greatest gift you give your spouse, the greatest gift you give your children, It's not in nurturing them. It's not in mothering them. It's not in taking care of them. The greatest gift you give your spouse, the greatest gift you give your children, is the gift of yourself. That's the gift that lasts forever. Love is work. The opposite of love is laziness. Before I end with our final blessing, I'd like to ask Don to say a few words as president of Life's Journey. May I introduce Mr. Responsibility?
Yeah. Yeah. Evening, everybody. I'll try to speak up. First, I want to say thanks for coming. Thanks for participating in this week, because it makes it all worthwhile. People ask, why do you do it? And I think my generation's going to need it. I think we have a lot of struggles. We have divorce, we have addiction, we have career changes, everything that every other generation has. And I think it's just changing. It seems like people are a little more uncomfortable than they used to be. Maybe times are more complicated than they used to be. And I want to end with a story as to why I think this is important. Because the spiritual tools that I've gotten going through this program have really affected my life for the better. A number of years ago, I have a 16-year and a 14-year-old, and about 13 years ago I got divorced. I met my first wife when I was single, and Father and I were working together, and I didn't know her that well. She wasn't Catholic, and we ended up, there was a there was a pregnancy, and I figured I could work it all out. And Father said, no, Don, don't take the easy way out. But I figured, what did he know? Well, anyway, we ended up in a marriage that was really opposite ends of the spectrum. And we fought about everything. One of the things actually a couple of things that we fought about. One was bathing. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City, and I wanted to bathe my kids every night. And she didn't. Her dad was an allergist, and she felt like that was too often. And it was a big topic of debate. A lot of control issues. Who was going to decide how we're going to do what? The other thing was the diet. You know, she wanted to feed them certain things because they were having allergic reactions, and I was a medic, and I was sure they weren't, and we just argued and argued. Well, eventually, we ended up, this is breaking the marriage up, and we're in front of a judge, and he's saying this, and she's saying that, and I'm saying this, and nobody's listening. Well, I'd get the kids and I'd throw them in the tub, and she'd get them home and want to know how often I bathed them, and we'd go to war again. Well, eventually, because nobody was cooperating, she made the innuendo that I might have touched them inappropriately. Now, I don't know about you, but I was a captain on the fire department, and I felt like, how dare you? How could you possibly, you know, how? And usually when something like that happens, you know, the bridge is burned and the gloves come off and nobody wins. Well, somewhere in the process of working with Father Allender and being able to look at my side of the street, I saw I was trying to control too. I was trying to set the tone and be in charge, much like how I was raised. My dad did that. Well, the fact that I had some program to turn to, I mean, last year, my ex-wife, and she's remarried, and they have another child, and my wife of 10 years, we went on vacation together. Now, that's a miracle. And when I go down to Tucson to see them, we can stay at their house because we can both repent and see our part in things. And, you know, it's important for the children because, you know, 50% of the Catholics are going through, have been divorced. And I'm speaking to a lot of people out there. We can transcend our differences, but only with the grace of God and only with the spiritual program that gives us some tools to be able to grow, especially when we're uncomfortable. So I think that's what this mission's about. And I want to give people who are in deserts, whatever they may be, if we can turn to God and we can ask Him for help. In my life, it made all the difference. And that's what my prayer is for all of you as we go through this together, life's journey, that we can help one another and we can grow and get closer to God. And that will radiate, the kingdom within radiates outward. And that's my message. Thank you very much.